What's going on, everyone? This is the Notorious Base, and we are back again for another wonderful Resident Evil discussion. Today I am joined by two other fellow content creators that have joined me on a previous project, and I am so excited to have them back on. They are dear friends of mine. We have Mr. Tibbs, an absolute tank when it comes to Resident Evil lore. What's going on, Mr. Tibbs? Welcome back to the channel.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages. Thank you very much, Mr. Bass, for having me on. It is an absolute pleasure to be here once again. Looking forward to coming up with some discussions and some conversations about what is happening in Resident Evil's future.
Yeah, and I think we have a lot to discuss today, and we can't do that without the man himself. To my left, I have my brother, Gemini. What's going on, man?
What's up, my brother? It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's great to be sitting here with you gentlemen again, and always a pleasure to share a room with experts like yourselves.
Absolutely, my friend, and it is always a pleasure to have such a talented creator such as yourself on the stream. So, once again, guys, we are going to be diving into some conversation about projects that are near and dear to our hearts, but also, where are they? And what is going to happen? So we have a couple of things set up. Gemini, I'd love for you to take the floor on this, and let's get going.
You got it, my man. So, the way I've got this, guys, is I am not the expert. I love Resident Evil. Every facet of Resident Evil. And whether you love it or hate it, Resident Evil 6, I have played most of them. We've all been involved in this franchise for a very long time. We're all veterans of it, and these two gentlemen are literal professionals in each of their respective fields. So I am going to take the wheel as host, as it were, of this video, and I'm going to pepper you guys with the top 10 questions about Resident Evil 9. I am going to share some of my thoughts and theories as we go, but I'd really like you guys to speak at length on what you think and see if we can't make some predictions about the future of the franchise. Is that cool with both of you?
Absolutely. We need to cue the Price is Right music for you as the host. I am excited. Let's do this. How about you, Mr. Tibbs?
I'm so excited for this. I've got so many sort of ideas and thoughts already. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to sharing them with you both.
Yeah, and I will say for the Notorious Base crowd and others, let's wake up. Let's get going.
Yes, let's wake up! All right then, guys. Well, if it's okay with you, let's not keep our audience waiting any longer. I'm going to open with the first question. I'll make my points and I'll share a couple of thoughts on it, and then I will pass it over. So, if we're ready, we'll open with question 1, which is a simple one, kinda. Who do you think the main characters will be? Now, I see a lot of speculation on Leon being the main focus, but thinking about the games chronologically, we haven't had a female lead since Jill in RE3, unless you count DLC like Separate Ways or Shadow of Rose. But I wanted to know, what are your thoughts? And if it's cool with the man of the hour, I'd open with you, Brother Bass.
I appreciate the passing of the baton, my brother. And that's some really solid insight. I see a lot of different things on the internet, right? And I've seen a lot of leaks, whether it be from the infamous leaker Dust Golem, right, who always seems to find the information before it even lands on the internet. I see a lot of things about Leon being the main protagonist, and while I am very excited to see my bowl cut knight in shining armor, I am interested in the secondary character. And I think that's very fair to say, right? We have a lot of characters that just seem to disappear over time, like they're just trash and they throw them to the side. Carlos. But anyway, I really want to see another female lead that is not Ada in this game. And I think every time we see Leon, we have to see Ada. And as much as I love Ada, do not miss the point, I really want to see Jill. But from some of the leaks, some of the different rumors, we're seeing that Jill really isn't a part of this, and I don't know why. It seems that they're going to go in the Mutamycete direction, which again, we have to finish, right, what has already been started. I thought with the Ethan Winters story, we kind of finished that all up, but, you know, Rose is still around, and we obviously got to play Shadows of Rose, which was the main, you know, DLC for Resident Evil Village, and it was good, and I really do like Rose's character, but again, I really wanted to see Jill in this. I'm a little bummed. Again, the game isn't out, so we could all be totally wrong here, but My vote is I would love to see Jill Valentine pair up with a character that she has never been with before, except for Resident Evil Death Island. And my mic is hot, but I'm going to pass the baton over to my brother, Mr. Tibbs. What do you think?
So I think for various reasons that we will get onto later, I don't think Leon is going to be the main focus. I think that our girl Claire is going to be one of the main characters for this. I think the leaks that we've kind of got from Dust Golem and stuff like that, yes, are normally sort of 99.9% accurate with the sort of Rose and the sort of like finishing off the Mutant Might See story. But I think Claire is going to be our sort of main focus. In terms of side characters, I do think that Leon might be a part of it, but for other reasons that we'll go into later.
Interesting. Why do you think that Claire will have any part in this? I mean, for some reason, and this is something that I think a lot of fans will notice, is that Claire has been in a few games, but she doesn't get the love and respect as a lot of the other characters. I don't know what you guys think, but I really truly like her, and I'm not opposed to the idea of her being in the game. It's just, it seems for some reason, like when you hear Leon, right, as like a main character, people go nuts. Whether it's from 2 or 4, definitely not 6, but his story was pretty good in 6. It's just, he captivates so much, and I just want to see like a crossover that we've never seen. Hell, I'll even take Chris or Carlos, you know what I mean, and have them together in a game, just boulder punching. I don't even care at this point. Just give me something new.
So I think the reason for Claire is because I think, one, we are going to get a CVX remake. So I think we're going to get if RE9 is coming before that, I think they're going to make us get used to Claire again and how she controls and what she's like as a character, and sort of give us that sort of personality so that when CVX drops, it's going to be like, oh, well, we're used to this character. We've played as her before, sort of thing, in recent years. So, yeah, I think Claire is definitely going to be that sort of main focus because of that, as well as they're going to, I think, sort of tie a lot of stuff from CVX into this new one, sort of give us the ideas of what a CVX remake will look like because of RE9.
I like that you said that, because honestly, if I recall, when it comes to as great as 7 was, and people really enjoy Village, they always felt like testing ground assets for like the remakes and like other games. So like, I really do believe what you say, that RE9, we're probably going to see a lot of mechanics, especially if they stick to the third person. That's one thing I really hope they do, is stick to third person. But again, we'll figure that out as it comes along and as we continue with the questions in front of us. But I do agree with you. I think RE9 will have a major focus on what the next remake will also feel like as well. Yes.
Nice, okay. So, some really good insights there, and something that I hadn't considered about Dust Golem, because you're both absolutely right. He's generally right on the money. But I suppose we'll find out when the time comes. But for now, we're going to move on to question 2, because you guys have touched on this already a little bit anyway, and I'm going to try and expand on it. Question 2 is, could we potentially see a co-op aspect, like in RE5 or 6, where a second player could perhaps take control of an accompanying character, which would otherwise be an AI companion like Sheva was to Chris? I'll open it with Mr. Tibbs, because you said you have more to say.
So I think if the leaks are to be considered without a pinch of salt and sort of going along what has been said, I think a 0 remake is in the works as well, which I think that's how they're gonna introduce the sort of co-op aspect of an AI partner. Now I believe that they're going to do this with RE9 by giving us a secondary character that we will switch to rather than an actual sort of AI partner. So I believe that we're going to maybe see the return of Sherry, or maybe see the return of Leon or someone like that, or even Chris. And instead of them going through the same sort of building that we're going through, that we're going to end up switching to them to then solve different parts of where we are, sort of thing. So say, for example, if we are being set in a castle, Claire might be down in the dungeons while Chris is on the main floor solving puzzles on how to get the dungeons open so that them two can then reunite again. So I think that they could do that, but with everything else that's being said about this going back to true survival horror and sort of like that sort of horror aspect, I don't think we're going to get that in this game, because I feel that if you're going true survival horror, you need to be by yourself and playing by yourself to have that sort of aspect.
I mean, you said a lot of really important things right there, Mr. Tibbs, and honestly, if there's any game to really go ahead and attempt the co-op, it would probably be Zero. I personally don't want it. I think that back when RE0 was first made, they didn't really have that tech yet and the online, like magnitude to really go ahead and have another player join you. I think that if they have the players kind of like the characters split up at portions of the game, it'll still make it scary, but I agree. I don't think co-op horror really does the job for me. I don't think it really did the job in Resident Evil. I am a huge Resident Evil 5 fan. The game is not scary. It doesn't have a bad story. I don't care what anybody says. I actually really enjoy the story, but the horror, the scare factor is pretty much gone. You need that one-on-one, like intimate feeling with the game where you're just kind of like immersed in it and you're like, holy crap, this is terrifying. And I think we lack that a lot in gaming now, and they really try to push co-op on a lot of things. I think if you want to make it fun, go ahead and do co-op in like the DLC, or maybe like a I don't know, like a mercenaries mode or like a battle mode, right? But to sit there and add co-op to a game that never had it, I could understand them doing it for Zero, right? Because of the Billy and Rebecca dynamic. But again, if you incorporate that, just understand it's probably not going to be that terrifying. I mean, if we've seen anything from the Outlast trials to Phasmophobias to the Devours, right? Like, they have their scare factors, but there's more laughs in the horror than there are, like, actually truly being terrified. So, me personally, it's possible that we see it. I don't think we see it in 9, but I do think that there's a possibility we can see it in the remakes because of obviously 5 and 0, but I pray to God not.
Yeah, I completely agree with both of you on that aspect of the fact that there can be more than one player does take away some of the fear factor. I found that a lot with most horror games that allow you to play with several people, particularly when they're people that in this day and age it's different, especially because you can have like chat rooms open and microphones and everything, and it does take away from the atmosphere. You lose a sense of immersion because the idea of the games being so atmospheric is that it draws you in and it makes you a part of that like area, so you're genuinely in fear of every noise that goes off around you. Playing it with a friend could be fun, and the games are supposed to be fun, don't get me wrong, but they are horror titles, and I completely agree with what you said, Brother Bass, that Resident Evil 5 was a great game. It was a lot of fun, the mechanics were good, it played very well, but it was not scary. But if we're thinking perspective, let's move on to question 3, because I'm interested what you guys have to say about this, especially regarding the newer models, because now technology is not a limiting factor. Do you think that Resident Evil 9 will continue the first-person perspective from 7 and 8, or do you think the success of the over-the-shoulder perspective in the remakes could sway developers? Now, I learned recently, from yourself, Base, in fact, that Capcom originally wanted Resident Evil to be a first-person game, but were limited by the technology of the time. So I'll ask that you consider that those limits are no longer a factor while you formulate a response. What do you think?
Yeah, so I would say that's a really good question. I honestly, it took them until the year 2000, 4 years after they finally put out the final product in 96, to have a like rail shooter version, which was Resident Evil Survivor. Again, they did a really big emphasis on never showing who Ethan Winters was. I don't know if they just, I know a lot of, there's like speculation that they wanted you to be Ethan Winters, but there also is character models of his character out there, so I'm a little confused on what they wanted. But the first person mode, I think, was a really good experiment for 7. I wasn't the biggest fan of 8, although it is a fun, casual experience. Resident Evil's formula is played best either in third person or fixed camera. And I'm not saying that as an old time fan, right? Like, oh, you're stuck in the 90s, Notorious. No, like, honestly, like, these games are built to have a scare factor, whether it's the fixed camera and you can't see what the hell is on the screen, or third person and something's running directly at you. the immersion of first person is a great feeling, right? From games we've seen before, like I've touched on with Outlast and, Condemned and Fear. But I I think that Resident Evil has tried too much to mix around with formulas, and while I don't think 7 and 8 were bad, I think they were fantastic for what they were. I think that's where we should leave first person, and I think we should get back into third person because these remakes have outdone themselves, except 3. But everything else has been great, man. So I will pass it over to Mr. Tibbs. What do you think, my brother?
So I've kind of got the opinion that I think that they are going to change the formula once again. So if you look at the way that Resident Evil has evolved over the years, we've had 1 to 3, which were the fixed camera angles, 4, 5, and 6 were over the shoulder, and now 7 and 8 was the first person. Although that 8 got the update for a third person mod, third person perspective added in. I think with 9, they are going to change it back, but they are going to change it back to fixed camera angles. And I think that could work really, really well if done in the right way. Like if we go back to old school Resident Evil where you can hear like a window break and only go around the corner to find that a zombie has broken in or a molded has broken in. Like, I hope we don't get any molded. Like, I hope we do go back to those sort of traditional sort of enemies of zombies and sort of lickers and hunters and stuff like that. But yeah, I think we may get a fixed camera angle. If not, I think it'll be a third person, and then we get the option like we did in 8, where it will be a fixed camera angle option.
I like that. I mean, I will touch on that because I think if they just gave you the options, I know, with the technology we have in this day and age, I don't really feel like hearing excuses that like you can't add fixed camera angles, because if modders could do it with no problem and it's very well done, a giant team like Capcom could definitely make something happen. Put fixed, put third, put first. It sells no matter what, and if you want your game to sell the best, just take advantage of all 3. Why can't we have that option? Sure, first person is a lot different than third, we know that, but we've seen so many games like Fallouts in them that could change from first to third. So again, it's very hard for me to sit here and hear the excuse by, anybody that, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no. You can do this and you could capitalize on so much revenue if you just give players the option to switch between the angles they want to play the game at. So, honestly, my hope is that it did go back to fixed camera angle one day or third person. I mean, first again, they could continue with, but yeah, I'm going to stick with my decision because, hey, man, Resident Evil is ever evolving, and I just hope it doesn't go back to being a replica Gears of War game. That's all.
Yeah, perfectly said. And it is a brilliant point because Resident Evil is a very unique experience to everyone that plays it, and you should be given some people don't like the first person perspective of the new games. They feel like it doesn't feel like a Resident Evil game, it feels more like Call of Duty, or a Fallout game or something like that. But it's understandable why the old video games used to use fixed camera angles and everything like that, but we have the technology now, and like Base touched on there, modders can quite easily give us these downloads where you can play from first person, you can play from third person, and if it's that simple that an individual game developer can go in, take the files and alter them, then why can't a AAA studio with millions and millions of dollars behind the budget? And I'm not trying to disrespect Capcom or the developers in any way. I'm sure there is a reason behind their madness, as there always is, but I do feel it would add a lot of value to the player and a lot of replayability value as well as far as content creation goes. You could play the game from every conceivable angle. It'd be brilliant to add to the exploratory value and see how you would adapt to the different style. But speaking of evolution, let's move forward to question 4, which is, how will the gameplay mechanics evolve from previous entries? So it's probably a given that the game will involve inventory management and an emphasis on crafting to suit players' preferred style. But what about combat mechanics? I personally feel that the combat in RE4 Remake was the most fluid and satisfying, with a comfortable blend of offensive, defensive, ranged and melee techniques. It felt balanced. unlike RE6, which, while it was extremely varied, it felt far too overcomplicated for its purpose. What do you think, Brother Tibbs?
Well, this is kind of going back on my point of I think that we're going to be gearing up for sort of the older style remake. So we're kind of gearing up for RE0 remake. There's potential talk of an RE1 remake, as well as CVX. So I think in terms of combat, I think we're going to get a very old school sort of wiggling the controller to get free, and like that sort of the sort of jump scare sort of mechanics of enemies just not really knowing where they're coming from, and stuff like that. Kind of what Blooper Team did with Silent Hill 2 remake, that you'll see something run across in the background, and then next thing you know, it's jumping at you from the right hand side, and stuff like that. I also believe that we may get some beta mechanics from RE 3.5 in there, with that kind of, if we are sort of still dealing with the mutamycete and sort of Evelyn clones and stuff like that. I think we might see sort of a vision type enemy that will sort of come at your face but is not actually there, and you'll have to like sort of jump back a little bit and stuff like that. So I think it's going to be very slow paced, but it's going to be very much in that horror aspect.
I mean, I could definitely agree with you, Mr. Tibbs, and also Jem. You both make really solid points. I think when it comes to the mechanics of the game, I think that's where it's going to be the focal point. All right, Resident Evil's gameplay has always been its biggest strong suit. Right? Even tank controls, which I've talked about in my retrospective videos, as uncomfortable as they make you feel vulnerable, right? And Mikami had planned that from the start. And I think having something like that where up is up, down is down, left is left, yada, 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 is so important, because when people are running away from a giant snake in the remake, they're not thinking about what button they're pressing. They're thinking about how the hell can I get out of the room fast enough? And I think it plays on the mind psychologically, and I think that's what makes these games so awesome, right? It's kind of like the fog in Silent Hill, where like you don't know what the hell is out there, but it was just literally made so that it could mask a lot of the different things that were wrong with it. And I think that, which there was nothing wrong with it, it was just like any of its imperfections. And I think that Resident Evil experimenting with, fixed camera angles, still backgrounds that were just amazing with a little bit of added fire sprites it was way ahead of its time, and it felt really good. I do hope we go back to a better inventory management, because honestly, by the time I got to RE5, I didn't even know what the hell I was looking at anymore. The only thing I liked was the music. And I really like RE4 Remake, the case, it was always a classic, but I'd like to see a little bit more of, like Resident Evil 2 original. Like I miss those, like where you saw the picture of the person. I mean, they're not going to go backwards, Capcom, because again, absolute nothing but respect to Capcom. Love you guys. But they're focused on the money, right? They're focused on making sure that they produce the best possible content better than their competitors. And that's, I believe, why they dropped the cease and desist on the 3.5 code Madman. Again, that is very important to understand, because maybe, just maybe, they posted a cease and desist on it because they want to use something like that. And I think Mr. Tibbs touched on that a lot, where there might be like maybe a creature that we haven't seen before, or like even like a black fog, which, those versions of RE4 ended up turning into their own respective franchises. But I do think we'll have a defense mechanic. I didn't mind the dodge mechanic in RE3 Remake. I think it was so good. The knife mechanic of being able to defend yourself was really, really good. Took a lot of time getting used to. And melee attacks are great. I have nothing wrong with those, but you got to make it scary, and you really got to make this gameplay sell. So yeah, that's my take.
And a valuable one at that, because it's something that we've had for a long time in the franchises. Like, every game gives us updated mechanics. Like, let's take RE2 to RE3, not the remake, sorry, the originals. RE2 to RE3 it implemented a dodge mechanic. And granted, it was in its infancy and it was janky as all hell, but it was a change, right? It was something different, and it was something that added a new aspect of combat to the game. And they continue to expand on that with RE4 when they give Leon the ability to use close quarter combat and to fight off enemies. And I think they did that expertly in Resident Evil 4, which is why that's got my favourite combat mechanics of all time, because it just seems so fluid, but it doesn't seem over the top like it's trying to be an action movie. Like, there is a genuine rise in heart rate when Dr. Salvador comes at you with a chainsaw and you're in a corner and you have no choice but to block it. Like, that is fear, but you're still in combat. It's brilliant. Speaking of mechanics, let me move on to question 5, which is, could Resident Evil 9 feature a merchant character like the Duke or a shop mechanic? Can we expect enemies to drop loot like in some of the newer titles, or will they instead favour the old school methods of attaining weapons and upgrades?
So I would love to see the Duke come back. I think he is the best thing that came out of RE8. Especially that kind of ties in with my own sort of theory about the Duke, of him being Joseph Kendo, of being Robert Kendo's brother. And if we are getting these classic characters back, it would be cool to see that theory sort of explored in more depth and see another sort of spin on a classic character returning by saying, oh, by the way, the Duke is Robert Kendo's brother. I think it would be cool to see the Duke come back, but in my sort of opinion, I think we are going to go back to that sort of finding resources on the ground, finding sort of ammo on the ground. I think enemies are sort of like an RE7, where you're going to more find them in boxes and find them sort of along the level and stuff like that, rather than enemies dropping it. I just hope when it comes to the enemies that they're not as bullet spongy as what RE2 remake was. But yeah, I think it could be interesting to see both mechanics play out in some form or another, of having a Duke like character that can upgrade your weapons, but only if you've found like hidden collectibles sort of thing, rather than a money system. I think it would sort of encourage replayability, because I think it would be more of a kind of end game thing that you sort of unlock as a end game thing of, oh, by the way, in your next run you can go to the merchant to then upgrade your pistol to a burst pistol or something to that effect, but only if you've found like 3 copper heads or something like that, or something to that effect.
So, I like what you said, and honestly, when I thought of the Duke and the word kendo, I said in my head, sorry about that, babe. What are you buying? So I'm absolutely lost in space right now. But honestly, I don't mind seeing, a merchant or a Duke, or I don't even care if it's just a random traveler that's sitting by a bonfire that gives you something. I like the aspect of being able to pick up ammo and find ammo along the way, kind of how like RE2 and RE1 did it. The shop mechanic is cool, but again, if it's true survival horror, there should be nobody that's lending you a hand, right? This is survival of the fit. This is you escaping a nightmare. And while I don't think that those mechanics are bad at all, I love them for their games. I don't think that I just think like how we said that 7 and 8 were perfect for being the only, the really good first person games in the Resident Evil franchise. I think that 8 and 4 having the Duke or the merchant mechanic is, for their respective games. I would just like to see going forward new stuff, right? New concept, maybe even some freaking scrapped concepts if they remake RE5. And I'm sure Mr. Tibbs and Jem, you guys know a lot about the RE5 original concepts, but the story was not going to play out the exact same way. And the way Chris Redfield and even Sheva really reached, Africa and figured out what they had to do. I don't even think she was a character that tagged along with Chris. She kind of just like helped him out. So again, if we have some stuff like that where like we're just bringing in new concepts or old ones that were never seen of the light of day, right, it would be so fluid and just satisfy so many fans, because I think like if we keep redoing the same thing over and over again, eventually it gets stale. So that's my take.
I agree, and this is something that I hadn't really considered too much, or at least not put a lot of thought into until you just said it then. I believe that the way it's going to move forwards as far as like item management, well, not item management, but like enemy drops or a merchant system, it's going to be revolving around whether or not the game focuses more on the horror side of things or more on the action side of things. Like, if I'm playing RE2 Remake, that to me is a horror game. Like a true survival horror game where you're limited to what you can get, and you have to utilize your ammunition really carefully, because it's not like you can just pop back into the main hall, speak to Marvin, and get some more ammunition when you run out. You know, you have to conserve, you have to protect yourself, and you have to worry about how much durability is left on that knife, because you can't just go and repair it. And while Resident Evil 4 was a brilliant blend of the two, if Resident Evil 9 wants to be a horror game, they're going to want to stick to the former and have you collect items the old-fashioned way. But let's think ahead. Question 6. Do you think that Capcom will introduce a new antagonist, or could we see a familiar villain return? We've seen a lot of speculation surrounding our heroes like Leon, Chris, Claire and Jill making a return, but could we see an old enemy come back in some way? Now, further to that point, I find it very difficult to recall any major enemies from the franchise who are yet to meet their demise, such as the Birkins, Wesker, and Nemesis, unless potential upcoming remakes like RE5 and Code Veronica serve to retcon some of these popular enemies. I think Capcom would be forced to introduce a new villain, unless they take one of our heroes and turn them into a heart-wrenching adversary. Like, I really enjoyed a theory Mr. Tibbs and I discussed in 2023 about Leon perhaps suffering PTSD and maybe being driven to madness by it over years of being subjected to apocalyptic events and personal loss. But feel free to expand on that as you answer the question. And Tibbs, I'll let you answer that one first.
So I think that we are not going to get one of our big four as a big bad. I think, as I said, if we're going into that sort of Evelyn sort of clones and being made to see stuff and stuff like that, and this is why I think Claire will be our main character, because I think that what we're going to have is a scene where Leon is sort of seeing maybe Sadler or something like that in his head, and he goes to pulls the trigger, and then you just see Claire drop to the floor with a fatal heart shock sort of thing. I think that is going to be how the sort of story wraps up, in sort of that sort of thing, and then Leon's going to be like, oh my god, what have I done? This can't be happening, and then we're going to switch over to Leon for the end of the story, or switch over to whoever it is that has that moment. I think we're then going to switch over to that moment of, right, I'm going to kill the connections now because of what they've just made me do.
So, I really like this question. And Mr. Tibbs, I really like that take. There's some parts that obviously we always like have our own ways. We're going to disagree. But this one, I'm going to just change out some of the characters on you. What if, and hear me out, because I know there's a lot of people watching this, and I know they're staring at me and they're like, Notorious, get some help. What if we see Wesker in this game? And hear me out, because if we're going to get a remake, kind of like Gemini said, that retcons maybe Wesker's death, people live and die by Wesker. He has been the bad guy since 1996, okay? Even without him knowing he was the bad guy. He was betraying everybody left and right. I think what Resident Evil 5 did was kind of screw the pooch a bit too early and kill off their main bad guy. So then by 6, we were fighting a bot. Literally, the main bad guy was like a Sims character. It was dog water. And I don't even know the story of RE6 at this point. I feel like I'm always bringing up RE6. It's just amazing. But still, at the end of the day, I think that Wesker coming back, showing his face, making people literally, the reactions on YouTube here will be unbelievable, just seeing his face. Because whether it confirms that they're going to retcon it or not, and obviously 9 will be out before 5, I do also agree with the take. Now, I'm not saying I'm right? That's just a theory. But another take would be Chris going insane. and really getting taken over by the Mutamycete, or just, kind of like the same thing you said with Leon. Chris has really been in a lot of Resident Evils. Aside from Leon, he's probably been in the most Resident Evils now. And I think that the constant loss of people, losing Jill at one point, right? Just losing Ethan, losing so many things along the way to these viruses, I really could see him suffering the same fate as Pierce from RE6. And honestly, like one of our Giga Chad heroes might have to put him down. Maybe even Jill, right? His love interest. I'm not saying any of this is correct. Again, this is speculation, but I think either a Wesker, comeback where we just see him with his Johnny Bravo haircut ready to roll. I mean, I would be so happy to see that. And honestly, I think Chris may be the one that suffers some sort of fatal demise in this game.
I am going to be absolutely devastated if we lose Leon or Claire. Because for me, and I'm biased in that regard, because it would suck to lose any of the big four. I do agree with what you said about Wesker being off too early in Resident Evil 5. But back then, when I first played Resident Evil 5, I thought that was going to be like the end of the franchise, and Resident Evil 6 kind of caught me off guard. But I do think a retcon would be wise, given the amount of influence Wesker could have in upcoming games. But not just Wesker, like other enemies, if they could have survived, maybe even expanded on the Nemesis project. Like, obviously Mr. X was not one of a kind. He felt one of a kind in the original, but he was one of a multitude of Mr. X designs, and Nemesis was just a variation of that. So I think it would be cool if the remakes, as they make them, could kind of retcon some of these early and potentially rash decisions, but it would necessitate Umbrella's involvement. Speaking of which, I really want to move on to question 7, which is, what role will the Umbrella Corporation play in the new narrative? Of course, we're all familiar with the formula by now, and as predictable as it seems, it always ties into Umbrella Corp. Could we perhaps see one of our more seasoned veteran characters working with Umbrella in some capacity? What do you think, Brother Tibbs?
So, as we know, Chris, when he kind of first turned up in 7, he was part of the Blue Umbrella group, which was sort of, they kind of reformed with old scientists and stuff like that, and wanted to sort of clear their name in a way, and kind of make themselves the good guys of the franchise. I would be very, very interested to see, and this kind of backpacks on Brother Bass's idea of Wesker still being alive. I would love to see sort of the connections actually being like a neo umbrella or a modern day umbrella sort of thing, that we kind of get that reveal of, oh my god, it was Umbrella all along, or as 8 has tried to set up with the BSAA, of the BSAA is now the new Umbrella, so to speak. And with Wesker at the head of that, and having been the head of that for so many years now, if they do retcon his death, I think would be a very interesting take on how you do a sort of main big bad company and main big bad returning.
I think that was well said. I don't know how to top that. Other than this, I will say that the Umbrella Corporation is definitely still alive and well, but I think they're in the eyes of the connections, I'm sorry. I think that the connections are actually former members of the Umbrella Corporation, the Red Umbrella, the one that we know that has been haunting Raccoon City for a long time, and all of us players. I think that the connections have a lot of ties to what originally Umbrella wanted to do. I don't think Blue Umbrella is honestly innocent, and now that the BSAA has been sending bioweapons in to do their dirty work, and literally Chris charted a course to their HQ in Europe, I think we're going to see something with that, with Chris in that game. And whatever may happen, right, it will definitely dignify how the story is going to be told. The Umbrella Corporation and Wesker, I'm sorry, they are such pinnacles, right? They're pillars of Resident Evil. And I mean, when you kill off, like, you took out Umbrella by the time of Resident Evil 4, and then you kill Wesker by Resident Evil 5, it's like, but now you've made a franchise that's a cash cow and you're making so much money off of it, and it's fantastic, but yet you've killed off some of the best characters and plot summaries that it had. I'm just a little confused on why, and I think that's why they experimented with the Winters saga and like the Baker family, because they needed to bring something in. If I see any enemy coming back, I see, since they introduced Luis being a part of the Nemesis project and we saw his lab, I could see another Nemesis coming to be, because who knows where they sold some of those Nemesis projects to, and it seems like that lab was much bigger than originally planned. So we could even see a return of Nemesis. I got no problem with any of this. I just hope that the storytelling is well done and the gameplay is good. But again, Umbrella is alive and well, and they're just hiding out as the connections, kind of similar to like the Patriots in Metal Gear Solid. So
Nice, man. Yeah, really good take. And you know, that's something that I often forget that was retconned, was Luis Serra's involvement in Umbrella and the fact that he was a scientist, like a researcher, and that he does have some kind of ties to the Nemesis project. Now, again, you guys will know a lot more about that than I do, but it's something that fascinates me and something that I always want to look into. So I'll move on to this because Nemesis is one of the most iconic monsters, but he's a boss monster. And he was expected, he was literally on the box art. But what we can't be certain of in the new game is what kind of new basic enemies we're going to find, because we've covered a lot of that as well. So I'm going to expand on this point with question 8, which is, what kind of new enemies and bioweapons could we see in the new game? Because it seems that the enemies in recent games have been following a trend, like the Baker family, each representing a different genre of horror. For example, Jack being representative of slasher horror, such as Friday the 13th or Halloween, Marguerite obviously being body horror, like Cronenberg's The Fly, or, of course, John Carpenter's The Thing. That's another example, The Thing, great movie. And then Lucas being slightly more modern psychological horror, like the Saw franchise. They seem to double down on this formula in Resident Evil Village, only this time with the focus being on popular movie monsters being represented by the village leaders, representing vampires, werewolves, ghosts, and the Gillman. Considering these factors, do you expect Resident Evil will continue to expand on this formula in a different way, or go back to its well-established roots with more zombie-like enemies? Let me ask you that, Bass, sorry.
no, you're totally fine, man. I really like that detailed point you gave about like how movies have like those enemies that are constantly chasing you, right? Like they're very intimidating, and I think that Resident Evil has always captured that very well, starting off with Mr. X, then Nemesis, the village chief. I think there's been really good moments of it. I would like for it to stop now. And I could already hear it, right? I could already hear it. I think that it was well done again for the games that they were in. One thing I'd like to say is when it comes to Resident Evil and the bioweapons, I think we need to bring more to the table. Not lichens and witches and wardrobes and whatever the hell it is. I think that after we saw Lady D, right, and everybody like going crazy for her, and I'm not spoiling anything. You all have played the game. It's been out since 2021. She was literally the first person you took out. Literally, like we were running from her, and it was really intense and fun. But again, it felt like the constantly being chased by some sort of big bad was an old stale mechanic by now. I think that sometimes things are built in the right generations, and then they continue to try to bring things further on, and it's very hard to recycle something and say that it came out as like a perfect thing. We sometimes got to just leave these titles to where they came from, if that makes sense. And honestly, I would like to see something, maybe take something out of a Silent Hill book. You know, Silent Hill takes a lot of stuff out of the Resident Evil book out of respect for it. I think if you maybe bring more like of a fog, and you bring more of like an enemy of the unknown that's kind of just like hunting you down, and also more zombies or monsters that really fit the mold of Resident Evil. I don't want to see flying bats and vampires. I'm sorry, they're badass, but not for Resident Evil, because now we're touching into fantasy, and Resident Evil is not a Final Fantasy. So that's my take.
So with kind of expanding on that, like I said, I don't want to see the mold come back. I'm with you on this, brother Base, is that I kind of want to see an unknown enemy, something that we're kind of like has got like a sort of fog around them that you can't really see. Like it would be interesting to, because we've gone down the zombie route, we've gone down the sort of stalkerish routes and stuff like that, and the sort of movie villain sort of route. I would love to see them sort of tackle that sort of unknown now of having sort of the one, like the one enemy that can't be beaten, sort of thing, like that sort of moment of not a stalker enemy as of such, but that sort of enemy that what I kind of liken it back to is sort of with Alan Wake, where you've got to shine a light at them to then damage them. So I would like that sort of enemy, sort of like Haunting Ground and Clock Tower 3, where it's more like a puzzle to sort of damage them in a way that you've got to kind of get them in a certain area, or a certain sort of, you've got to do a certain mechanic to then sort of expose their weakness to then shoot at them, or something like that would be that sort of survival horror for me. Because to go up against zombies and creatures and stuff like that, like you say, we've done that before, and if this is going to be their sort of magnum opus of what they want the Resident Evil series to end on, they need to kind of bring big guns to the table, and they need to kind of bring, okay, we're going horror, we are going big guns, let's bring these like unkillable creatures now, where like I said, that there's a mechanic involved to kill them, or something of that aspect for me.
It is really tough to decide on what could be the new enemy and what could be considered new in the Resident Evil franchise, one that spans decades now and has covered so many different genres of enemies. You know, we've covered zombies and vampires and lycans. Like Base said, we've touched on practically everything that there is in the horror genre, and it's like, are they running out of ideas? And I don't think you necessarily can, because it's. I remember the first time I ever asked my father what a liquor was. I seen a picture of one in a magazine. Talked to Base about it the other day because I showed him the very magazine. I showed my father a picture of a liquor when I was like 9 years old. I said, "Dad, what's that?" And he didn't know. And I was like, this is cool. It was so like mind blowing to know there was a monster that my father couldn't identify, being a horror enthusiast as he was. And that's sort of a highlight, is that with it being like a virus kind of thing, you can go any which way with it. But it depends on the direction of the game. Speaking of which, I do have another question regarding that in question 9. What does the fact that Koshi Nakanishi is back in the director's chair for RE9 say about the direction the game could take given his previous work? What do you think, Brother Tibbs?
So Nakanishi, I think I've pronounced that right. I think is a brilliant director. I think the way that he handled 7, considering he had no sort of horror chops behind him, I think it gives it a lot of credence of what we could see in RE9. I would love to see a sort of, if we are going that sort of horror route, I would love to see a sort of like Evil Within-esque sort of direction, where we do get like a big bad, but we kind of don't see him, sort of thing, until like the final moment, and then we kind of fight him, sort of thing. Like, I feel like at the moment with other sort of Resident Evil games, like especially with 7 and 8, I think the problem that let it down with the directions is that you saw the 4 lords, or you saw the 4 bakers, and then they were just basically stepping stones to the final boss. I don't want that. I want a sort of main big bad that you see in the background, that you build up to, rather than going from boss to boss to boss to boss to being like, oh, okay, that's the final boss, hit him with a rocket launcher. I don't want that anymore. I want to have that sort of feeling that I've built up to this guy, and I've got a reason to shove a rocket launcher down his throat.
I mean, well said. I mean, you guys know me. Every friggin' Resident Evil game has a self-destruct sequence, or I'm shooting a rocket in somebody's ass. You know, like, I'm getting tired of the same And I agree with everything Mr. Tibbs said. I'm so tired of seeing the same stuff over and over again. It works for the time period, but again, let's focus on this question. Koshi Nakanishi-san, I love his work. I think that him as a designer in Resident Evil 5 was really good, and he brought a lot of new innovation to the Resident Evil franchise. Um, and then him as a director of RE7, funny enough, I think I've shared this with you gentlemen off screen, but Nakanishi-san said for Resident Evil 8 that the Japanese public actually found Resident Evil 7 so disturbing that they toned down the violence of the initial game, which made it a more action-based game for Village. So it seems that the Capcom kind of listened to the fans in one regard, but at the end of the day, I'd say that the main hub of fans were unhappy with that. You can't listen to the few and not the many. And Resident Evil is supposed to be scary. I'm sorry, but if you're playing Resident Evil, you need to be prepared to be scared. That's it. It's as flat as that. And if you don't, then go play something like FNAF. Because at that point, you're taking away the element of what makes the game Resident Evil. And again, if you want to try something else and you want to try new formulas, that's cool. But let's not nerf a game just to appease a few people. And I'm sure a lot of people can agree with me on that. And whether you do or don't, leave it in the comments section. But I truly do believe that Nakanishi-san will do very well for this game because 7 was amazing. And I really do believe that if he makes a third person over the shoulder, we will be very surprised with how good the storytelling is.
I'm in complete agreement, and I was literally applauding behind my muted microphone there because I agree wholeheartedly with everything that you've said. As much as I sympathise with those members of the Japanese public that were a little bit too disturbed by what was going on, it is a horror game. It's rated M for a reason, and you don't purchase a horror game and expect not to be afraid. The same as you wouldn't go watch a movie like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and then be really upset by the fact that there's a madman with a chainsaw in it cutting people up. It's like, what did you think was going to happen? And Resident Evil, especially with a name like Resident Evil, I know that it isn't that in Japan, so they can be forgiven, but it's called Resident Evil, and the game opens with you going into a house full of residents that are presumably evil. It's like, come on, guys! Like, what are you complaining about? And there are plenty of other horror-based titles, like you said. You could play FNAF, you could play Slenderman, you could play Poppy Playtime. If you want watered-down horror, there are places you can get it from indie developers. But if you want the highest quality horror experience, then Nakanishi-san is definitely on the money with what he's done there, and I hope that the new outlook doesn't really affect RE9. I hope that he just does whatever he really truly wants to do with it, and he lets us have it with both barrels. Anyway, I feel like we've all had a lot to say on all of these games, and I do have one final question, but it's a very simple one, so I'm going to ask that we wrap up with final thoughts. And just blanket drop some of these thoughts in there as well, just as you're wrapping up here, gents. And I'll let you close out for us, Brother Bass, because it's been an absolute pleasure having a conversation with you both, hearing your thoughts. And I've actually got more questions for you now, like rolling around in my head. But I'll take a while to articulate them, and maybe we'll expand on them in a future video if that's what the audience wants. And guys, for those of you watching, if this is something that you enjoy, I do have more questions. I'm sure you do too. Let us know in the comment section below, and I'm going to move on to this final question. Do you think it's likely that we'll lose one of the big four in RE9? Do you have any idea what the storyline might be, where it might take place, and of course, do you have any predictions for when we might see the game released? What do you think, Brother Tibbs?
So for me, we've already touched on who I think is gonna fall in RE9. I do genuinely believe that it's gonna be Claire because of the emotional connection to no matter who we see as a sort of male lead. I think Claire will be the one that kind of hits everyone the most. Even if we do see Jill as a side character, I think losing Claire is going to hurt everyone in that scenario. In terms of what do I think is going to happen and where it's going to take place. I think we are going to get a sort of RE 3.5 vibe, that we are going to be on inside a castle, much like Castle Dimitrescu, but on a very larger scale. I think there's going to be so many more sort of areas to explore. Like I said, I think there's going to be dungeons. I think there's going to be torture rooms. I think there's going to be regal rooms that we explore. That's going to have like puzzle rooms in it where you're going to have to figure out lineage and stuff like that. I think in terms of when we're going to see the game release, I believe if anything's to go by with current sort of releases and stuff like that, I think we might, because of where we've just had Monster Hunter Wilds and stuff like that, I think we're going to get a Capcom showcase probably within the next month or so, and we'll probably get a November or December release date. I think it is going to be this year, so that they can then concentrate on Onimusha next year, because obviously that's going to be their next big sort of Capcom project that they're going to start marketing towards, is going to be the Onimusha revival series and stuff like that. So yeah, I think all I can say is watch this space, because like I said, I think we're going to get a beta to a very loved remake, or a very loved game that people want to see remade, which is going to be Code Veronica. And then I think that everything else is going to sort of answer all the questions that we want answered. I genuinely believe that this is going to be the end of our main timeline set of games.
I mean, that was knocking it out of the park. One thing I would say to just piggyback off of that, me personally, I actually think that Leon will definitely be a main character in this game. First and foremost, I think that with Capcom having Okami 2 coming out as well as Unimusha, shout out Musashi Miyamoto, we finally get the legendary swordsman in a swordsman game. I cannot wait. That is probably not going to be out till late 2026. But I do believe RE9 is in deep development. Who do I think is going to reprise the role as the two main characters, and how is the story going to go? Well, I think we're going to have Leon, but I also think we're going to have Rebecca. I think that Rebecca is going to be a main character. I think that with Resident Evil 0 coming along and seeing the young Rebecca Chambers all grown up and really on top of her shit, I can't wait to see what we have. But again, just like Jill, Rebecca really hasn't been in much since 0 and 1, except for movies. And those CG movies are pretty good. My thing is that I think that the story is going to follow the Mutamycete. I think we're going to see once and for all the main storyline, as Mr. Tibbs, my brother, said, really end. I don't think the Resident Evil franchise will ever end, but I think that our main line stories, to where we'll probably see our characters again, no doubt in my mind, I think that the main plots and different things that have happened over the past 30 years, right, are going to end. I think we're going to see a dawn of more remakes. I think we're going to see a re-release of Resident Evil 1 remake. And honestly, I say Leon and Rebecca. I don't know exactly how the story is going to play out. I'm honestly very interested, because I thought the Mutamycete would be done by now. So I wonder how they're going to tie this in. It's probably in like Rose's fingernail or something. But honestly, at this point, anything can happen. When do I think it'll come out? I'm thinking 2026. If anything, I don't think it'll be out as late as Unimusha by any means, but the fact that we still don't even have a trailer, that's what worries me. So 2026, Leon and Rebecca, let's go.
Let's go. Well, gentlemen, this has been an absolute pleasure. A lot of very, very expert insight from the pair of you, as there always is. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for letting me host with these questions and being part of what you guys do. And I know that you've both got some really exciting projects coming up in the works at the moment. If you wanted to talk about those, by all means do. But for now, I'm going to call it a day and let you close us out. Feel free. It's been a pleasure working with you both. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, man. Mr. Tibbs, would you like to share anything that you're going to be doing on your channel? Because now is the time, and I really want to say before I hand it over to Mr. Tibbs, please go check out these guys' channels. They are pardon on some of the best content creators I've ever seen and worked with. They are very friendly gentlemen. Mr. Gemini over here does so much content over on Little Nightmares and a plethora of other games. I mean, really, some sensational work. And Mr. Tibbs, the lore expert himself, I mean, a man that could literally single-handedly beat the hardest Resident Evil game with a single knife. I mean, it's just incredible. So please give them a check out over on YouTube, right? Through their respective names. Mr. Tibbs, you have the floor.
So I just want to say thank you very much to Jem and yourself, Base, for letting me come on. In terms of what's coming up on my channel, a little sort of sneak peek into the next Let's Play that's going to be coming up on my channel is going to be Resident Evil Revelations 2. That's going to be also just going through the game on normal, just to kind of give you guys a feel for it, as well as some other challenges that we've got coming up on streams and stuff like that, which I'm very much looking forward to talking about on stream for you guys. Yeah, like I've always said, if you guys enjoy my content, don't forget to hit the bell and hit all notifications, because we have got some very, very exciting projects coming up in the next couple of months.
I can't wait for it. I can't wait for every single part of that. For both of you, wonderful, talented gentlemen. I can't wait to see what you cook up. As for me, we have some very interesting things coming. As you know, I am a no damage challenge runner, and I love the content I make over here, but I want to expand and I want to continue to grow alongside you guys. So we have a lot of different content, a plethora of content coming out this year in both short form and large form content. I can't share the details as to what we're doing, but we're going to be randomizing up the channel. Take that information with what you will. I'll see you guys on the next one. This is the Notorious Base signing out alongside my man Gemini and Mr. Tibbs. We'll see you for the next one.